Dylann's going to share her testimony with us. Why don't you give her a round of applause?
Well, it's only taken me almost 6 years to do this. I am going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. I cut a whole bunch of stuff because, the Lord, there's just so many ways that He works. So this is the play-by-play. So take what you will from this. There's so much more, and if you want to hear more about the intricacy of how God worked in my life, I'm more than happy to share that with anybody. So, I was an only child with a single mom. I knew that being a fatherless daughter had its implications. I knew that it caused a lot of damage, but actually writing out my testimony showed me the depths of that damage and how important it is to have that father figure in our life. So, at just 7 years old, I felt that I needed a boyfriend. I needed to feel desired, and I knew too much about physical intimacy, and that got worse when one of the boys I was friends with opened the door to adult entertainment for me. At just 7 years old, I ended up addicted to adult entertainment. It corrupted my view of womanhood, body image, and intimacy until I was freed 5 years ago, by the grace of the Lord. My teen years were really rough. I was told daily by my peers that I was too ugly to be loved, and that I was harassed, and every time I left the classroom, I would get harassed down the hallway. All of middle school and high school was just spent trying to survive being bullied and my many suicide attempts. It felt like the only hope I had to feel valued was by having a boyfriend, someone who was physical proof that I was actually wanted. So I ended up with multiple boyfriends from one to the next, and I was unfaithful to every single one of them. I would self-sabotage every good thing. I'd dress provocatively and send intimate photos on a whim just to hear more praise and to feel desired by someone like I was worthy of love. After I graduated, I was put on a very high dose of antidepressants, and I wasn't monitored by the physician. It was such a high dose, I couldn't dress myself properly. I slept for multiple days at a time, and I lost all sense of authority and fear of consequence. I started smoking at this time, and I ended up addicted for the following 13 years. I also started stealing, which could have given me a record if not for the grace and the concern of the person that I had stolen from. And after all these years of that weighing on me, just a few days ago, God put that person behind me in the grocery line, and He offered me the opportunity to ask for their forgiveness, which they so freely gave. Over time, I got on a manageable dose, and I ended up working at a pub that I played music at every week. And that's where I met Bryn, the father of my eldest son. You know him, he comes to our church. Oh, my hands are shaking, I'll put that down. He was a lifelong Christian. He grew up in a really wonderful Christian home. I did not, and I had never learned about Jesus. We went through a lot together, including more unfaithfulness on my part, but Bryn's grace was so emulant of Jesus, and we got through it. After a few years, we found out that we were pregnant. Just before Foster was born, I figured because Bryn was a Christian, the right thing to do would be for us to get married. So we got married right before he was born, and I didn't know God's design for marriage, and I didn't understand the heavy spiritual repercussions of divorce, which was very unfortunate because 7 months later we ended up separating, and it led to my very quick decline. I ended up with a bunch of mental health diagnoses after Bryn and me had separated, and my impulsivity from before grew even more. And I started back at sleeping around. I started partying really hard, using psychedelics, and becoming dependent on cigarettes and weed to get through the day. And when I say that, I mean like up to 2 packs a day and like 6+ joints a day. I was a very absent and self-absorbed mother at the time. My son was, 7 months old. Looking back, I'm always amazed by the protection and the love that Jesus offered me through Bryn's selflessness. He could have taken me to court, and he could have gained full custody of Foster, and he could have left with him. I could have lost my son, but he stayed here with our son, and he always stayed my friend. To give you a picture of how Jesus has worked through our family dynamic now, we all come to the same church, and Levi and Bryn, my new husband, my ex-husband, they do the same men's group together in Salmo. We spend the holidays together, and no matter how weird it might seem to other people, we're all friends. And I'm so grateful for God's protection in our family unit, and that just shows the love and the heart of Jesus. After a knee injury that required surgery and a full reconstruction, I ended up mentally plummeting, and I was institutionalized for 9 weeks in a mental health facility. And while I was there, I met a man, and I would occasionally hook up with him, but a friend of mine said that he was dangerous, and she persuaded me to stop seeing him. When I was released, I thought, okay, I'm starting over, I got a job, I got a rental in Nelson, and I decided to give dating one more shot. So I downloaded Tinder. For those of you that are older, Tinder is an app that you swipe if you want to try it out with a person. Okay, so I said to myself, if it doesn't work out, I'm done, I give up, I surrender. So you can guess who my last swipe was? He's in the back pew. He responded to my swipe with a message that said, "What's your favorite Nickelback song?" Why he's in the back pew and I married him, I don't know. We went on a few dates, and somewhere along the way we decided that we weren't really compatible, and we called it off. I know. After we had called it off, I lost my job, and in a timely fashion, COVID started. And by January 6th, 2020, I didn't have income or savings, and I needed to pay rent. So when that dangerous guy that I had been sleeping with in the institution messaged me, asking if I needed anything, I jumped on the opportunity. I told him I had lost my job and that I couldn't pay my rent, and I asked him if I could borrow the money, and he said, "Yep, for sure." But, and there's always a but, he said that I had to return the favor every week in exchange for his help. With my past, I didn't hesitate. So I hopped in the car to go to my friend's house and get high before going to his house to earn the money. When I got to my friend's house, she asked where I was going, that I needed to smoke so much. And so I said, I just don't have any other choice. I'm going to see that guy from before. And she said that she would drive me there and that she would wait for me. And it really shows how God will use anyone to be able to get you home safely into his arms. My friend was a full-on lesbian stoner. She worked in emergency at the time, and she was an intake admin worker. So when we pulled up an emergency, I figured she just needed to grab something from her desk, and didn't really think anything of it. But she instead said, "Get out. There's a doctor here that I think you should see." So she wouldn't let me not go in, so I went in. I've been to emergency many times for my mental health in the past, and they just put you in a stall with only the curtains for the walls, and you'd sit there for a couple minutes, and they'd just wait until you said, "I'm not going to kill myself," and then you go home. So I didn't really think that it was going to be anything different. But when I walked in this time, they put me in a real room with walls and even a door, and something felt different. Can you guess what doctor walked into my room? He came in and he asked me to tell him a bit about why I was there. I told him that Jen had brought me there against my will because I was going to sell myself. I saw him purse his lips at that and look away. And then he stood up and he said that he'd be right back. When he came back, he asked if he could close the door. So I shrugged and I said, "Yeah, sure." So he pulled up the stool and faced me directly. He asked me to tell him the real story, my story, the one that I'm telling you now. So I did. I told him all about my absent father, my childhood, about Bryn and my son, and all of the darkest places that I've ever gone to. And he never broke eye contact with me. He explained how following through with that exchange would mean that I sell my soul. And he asked me how much I was going to sell my soul for, which I told him was $400. At which he wept. I didn't understand why this emergency doctor was weeping in front of me. And it had taken nearly 45 uninterrupted minutes in emergency to hear my story, and that never happens. I didn't understand it because it was something I'd never experienced. The love that I've been looking for my whole entire life, to be fully seen, fully known, and fully loved, was the love of Jesus. God used Nick that day. He put his neck on the line and he shared all about Jesus to me in that little emergency room. And I physically saw the life of Jesus. I saw his face as he spoke life into me. He wrote down a phone number and he told me to call his pastor's wife. Well, I had grown up with his pastor's wife. And he said, "You need to tell her the whole story." And I said, "I'm not telling her the whole story." He said, "You're not allowed to leave unless you promise to tell her the whole story." So I promised to tell her the whole story. So I did meet with Bailey. And I did tell her everything. And I started coming to Bethel. I'd sit in that same back pew all on my own, and eventually I started driving Nellie to church. And I got to know everyone here, which wasn't that many people back then, believe it or not. Hallelujah. When I think of who I was when I first started coming here and when I went into that emergency room, it's really easy to fall into shame, and that's why it took 6 years to share this story. But Psalm 34 says that those who look to him are radiant, and that their faces are never covered with shame. I was visiting friends in the cusp, writing out a prayer to God, asking him to guide me, when Levi called me. We hadn't talked for weeks. I answered the phone, to which he just bluntly said, "I'm all in." And I said, "What?" He said, "I'm all in. If you're all in, then I'm all in. Let's do this thing." And I said, "Okay, what I gotta tell you, I'm a Christian now. I was saved." My ex-husband was a Christian, and I was the non-believer, so I understand your side of this, and I promise I'll never push it on you. And he said, "I don't care. Let's do this thing." So I said, "Okay, come to the cusp and pick me up, and I'm yours." And he did. A while later, we found out that Lynn, his mom, had been praying that he would meet a believer, and I fully believe that that prayer was integral to me being saved. I was asked to move to Weimar to live and work on a property there for landlords who lived in Singapore. And it was a huge blessing because that's right when COVID hit full on, so Levi moved with me. We ended up pregnant a few months later, and Levi really struggled to wrap his head around the pregnancy, and we were both close to opting for abortion. We had picked up the pills, and he asked me when I would take them. I told him I needed to have a smoke first. Yes, I smoked through all of my pregnancies, and I'm so grateful that the Lord protected my children. When I was outside, I texted Nick and Krista, and I asked them to pray for me, and they reminded me that with Jesus, I'd never be alone. So I went back inside, and I told Levi I wouldn't do it. Not that I couldn't do it, but that I wouldn't do it, and that I was keeping a baby. I told him he could leave, and I wouldn't hold it against him. He was angry, and he took a few days, but needless to say, he stayed. I kept going to church, and Levi would drop me off, and then he called it the Church of Dirt. He would go biking. I was baptized that spring with Ivy in utero, and 1 year from the date that I was saved, to the day, January 6, 2021, 2 floors up from emergency, I gave birth to my beautiful little Ivy May. Very shortly after Ivy was born, we got pregnant again and had Reuben, our cheeky, noisy boy in the back pew. Me and my little ones kept sitting in that special spot, enjoying the music and the word, and I felt like I was finally changing and becoming more of the woman he wanted me to be. I was still smoking more than ever. I tried all the tactics to quit, and then 5 months after Reuben was born, I crawled into bed next to Levi one night after I'd had a smoke, and he rolled over and he said, "Why can't you just accept that you're never going to quit smoking?" He wasn't a believer at the time, so every night I would pray in my head. So I rolled over and I prayed, "Lord, make a miracle out of me." That was it. I woke up the next morning and I have not smoked since. It's been 4 years. And it was all the Lord. And Levi knew I could never quit smoking. He said it himself, "You're never going to quit smoking." So this was the catalyst to him looking into the whole Jesus thing. Another 3 months later, and I was delivered from my daily weed addiction in an instant of renouncing it in this church basement. Levi then officially started coming to church with me and with the kids to learn more about how this could have happened, and he ended up saved. His 2 sisters followed after him too. That following summer, I was finally taken off antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds for the first time in 9 years. It's been almost 4 years without them now, and the Lord keeps on showing up. Levi and I got engaged after 4 years together and 2 babies later. We did it a little backwards, but we got there. And we started playing worship together and praying together. Love you, baby. We were married on the 12-acre property that God had gifted us before COVID hit, and Nick spoke our blessing at our wedding. It just felt so full circle. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "Therefore, anyone who is in Christ, the new creation has come, the old is gone, and the new is here." That didn't happen right away. I was saved and still stumbling, like all of us are. And for a long time, it stayed that way. But it's the most lived scripture for me, and it's part of what made sharing my testimony so hard, because it's hard to believe that I was that person before who I am now. I became someone free of bondage. I'd been in since 7 years old. I became the mother and the wife I always wanted to be. I became a daughter to the King. I was never meant to have a father on earth because no one can compare to him. And not by my own strength, but by the intricate workings and the relentless love of Jesus. And there's a song that says, the enemy thought he had me, but Jesus said, you are mine. You are mine. I walked into that emergency room 6 years ago dead. And I came out alive, and I came out a child of God. And I'm here before you testifying that he is so good. He's so good. And when I'm on the stage singing worship, all I can see is him. All I can see is him sitting on his throne, redeeming me and restoring me, and getting to see my children have beautiful fathers that emulate the love of Christ. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.